Hi, my name's Mark, and at my father's will reading. My brother stood up, smiled, and claimed $16.9 million like it was his birthright. Me? I got a wallet with torn seams, and a letter that made my dad's face go pale. They planned it. They lied, they locked me out, and they made sure I stayed quiet all these years. But that letter, that one letter changed everything. Do you know what it's like to sit across from your own family and realize they never saw you as one of them? This isn't just a story about money. It's about betrayal, silence, and what happens when the invisible sun finally speaks. I arrived earlier than I needed to. That had always been my habit. When you're the youngest, you learn to take the chair that doesn't inconvenience anyone. I parked along the curb, straightened my jacket, and walked into the house I grew up in. The one with the pale walls and the living room that always smelled faintly of furniture polish and old habits. The room was already arranged. Chairs formed a loose half-circle, angled toward the coffee table where the attorney had placed his leather folder. My parents sat closest to him. My brother had the seat beside them, the one with the clear view of every face. I chose the chair farthest from the center, not because anyone told me to, but because it felt expected. Conversations flowed around me without slowing. My mother laughed softly at something my brother said. My father clapped him on the shoulder, proud in that casual way that never needed explanation. When I nodded hello, it went unnoticed. No one was unkind. No one needed to be. That was the quiet part that hurt most. I studied the room instead. The way people leaned toward my brother when they spoke. The way no one asked if I wanted water. I had the odd thought that if I stood up and left, it might take a while before anyone realized a chair was empty. The attorney cleared his throat and asked us to settle in. His voice carried a practiced calm, careful and neutral, as if he were discussing a zoning permit instead of a man's last words. He opened the folder and began reading through formalities. Dates, signatures, language that sounded sturdy and distant. Before a single figure was mentioned, I watched my parents' faces. They were already leaning forward. Anticipation had set its roots early. I felt my hands rest together in my lap, still cooperative, as though my body knew better than to demand anything. Then the number came, $16.9 million. It landed gently in the room, like it had always belonged there. My mother let out a breath she'd been holding. My father smiled and said something about responsibility and legacy. My brother nodded once, steady, accepting. A few people murmured approval. The attorney paused, letting it settle. No one looked at me, not a glance, not a flicker of curiosity. The absence felt deliberate, even if it wasn't. I realized then that the money wasn't the wound. Being invisible was. The attorney shifted his papers. There was a brief pause, the kind that suggests an afterthought. My father leaned back, reached into his jacket pocket, and slid something across the table toward me. It stopped just short of my knee. A wallet. Old. Brown leather cracked along the edges. One corner bent inward like it had been folded the wrong way too many times. It looked lighter than it should have been. Not worn by accident. Worn by use. "That's for you," my father said, his tone flat, almost efficient. My mother glanced at it and shrugged. "It's still useful," she added, as if discussing a spare set of keys. I picked it up without comment. The leather was soft in places, stiff in others. It didn't hold much. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, feeling the shape of it settle against my ribs. No one reacted. The moment passed as quickly as it arrived. Inside me, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. It felt more like the quiet sound of a door closing in another room. I thought of the times I'd been called because someone needed help moving furniture. The weekends I showed up without being asked. The late nights I stayed because I didn't want anyone to worry. I had never needed much, and somehow that had become the reason I received nothing. I sat there, breathing evenly, wondering when this version of me had been decided. Wondering how long I'd been playing a role I never auditioned for. I thought the wallet was the worst part, until the attorney cleared his throat and said my name. He said it slowly, like the room needed time to brace itself. "My apologies. There's one more item. For Jacob." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, like the moment before a branch snaps. I felt every pair of eyes in the room pivot, reluctantly, like their muscles didn't want to make the motion. Chairs didn't creak, but I could sense the discomfort in how people shifted their weight, how some sat straighter and others stilled completely. My father's jaw tightened. My mother blinked twice, fast. And my brother. He let out a quiet, annoyed breath. Not curiosity, just irritation, like the mention of my name had disrupted something smooth. The attorney adjusted his glasses and reached beneath the table. He pulled out a small manila envelope, the kind you'd use for something that didn't belong in digital form. He held it with two hands, almost too delicately. "This," he said, "was given to me directly by your grandfather. He instructed me, in writing, to hand it to Jacob in the presence of the family, after the primary will was read." He turned to me, eyes even and calm, and extended the envelope. Before I could move, my father leaned forward. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said. Not sharp, not loud. Just firm enough to signal he expected correction. My mother's voice followed. "Dad was confused toward the end. We all know that." The attorney didn't react. He kept the envelope extended in my direction. "It's in his handwriting," he said. "Signed and dated." "I'm sure it's nothing," my brother added, tossing it off with a wave of his hand. "Probably some old photos or a birthday card. Let's not dramatize it." His tone grated against the silence. I didn't look at him. I stood and stepped forward slowly, the weight of the room pressing on my shoulders like I was walking uphill. When I took the envelope, it was heavier than I expected. Not by much, just enough to feel intentional. I didn't open it. I held it in my lap as I sat back down, fingertips brushing the flap. Then, without warning, I felt the wallet in my jacket pocket again. Same spot, same weight, except now it felt connected. Not random, not just a cruel token. I hadn't noticed it earlier. It had faded into the background of my clothes, but now it pulsed like a signal, a message I hadn't yet decoded. That wallet, it wasn't a gesture. It was a setup. I looked around. Nobody was watching me now. They were watching the envelope. My father's posture had changed. He looked tense, not irritated. My mother's hands were clenched together in her lap. My brother stared at the floor, leg bouncing. This wasn't about fairness. This was about control. And something in this envelope made them nervous. The attorney cleared his throat again, as if ready to move forward. But my brother stood up. "Let me just check it," he said, already stepping toward me. "It's probably private. Dad wouldn't want us to make a whole scene over it." I turned toward him, holding the envelope closer. "Grandpa asked for this to be opened here," I said, louder than I meant to. "In front of everyone." He hesitated. My father stood next. "This is family business," he said, looking at the attorney now, not me. "We don't need outsiders pushing paper on us." The attorney didn't move, didn't blink. "I'm fulfilling a legal instruction. With respect, Mr. Colburn, if anyone here doesn't want to witness what's inside, they're free to leave." That landed hard. You could feel the power shift. Just a flicker. Enough to knock the old rhythm off balance. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I glanced around and realized something I hadn't fully felt until now. They weren't mad at me. They were scared of what was coming. This whole setup, my brother's inheritance, the wallet, the silence, was structured to erase me cleanly. But this envelope had broken that pattern. It was an error in their choreography. And I finally understood. This wasn't about me asking for a piece of something. It was about them keeping something hidden. As I sat there, gripping the edge of that envelope with one hand and feeling the outline of the wallet with the other, a thought clicked into place. They didn't forget me. They just hoped I'd stay invisible. That's when my brother reached for the envelope himself. And I knew this was never about money. He didn't look at me when he grabbed it, which told me everything I needed to know. His hand moved fast, fingers curling around the envelope like it was always his to begin with. Not snatching, no, that would have looked too desperate. It was casual, like you'd reach for your own coffee mug. Like whatever was inside belonged to him by default. The kind of move that didn't expect resistance because it never needed to. But that casualness? That was the first real crack in him. Everyone noticed. The room didn't breathe. My mother's fingers clenched around her scarf. My father leaned ever so slightly forward, then caught himself and pulled back. The attorney's eyes followed the motion with clinical detachment. And me, I didn't move. I looked right at my brother. And for the briefest second, just one sliver of a moment, he looked back. What I saw stopped the ground beneath me. It wasn't confidence. Not the usual dismissiveness or smug certainty I'd grown used to all my life. It was fear. Sharp, flickering, gone in an instant. But it had been there. The kind of fear you don't show unless something's about to be taken away. And in that blink, everything shifted. This wasn't about our grandfather's last wishes, or preserving peace, or avoiding a scene. He wasn't protecting the family. He was protecting himself. He handed the envelope back before I said a word, pretending like he'd only meant to look. He didn't apologize, he just smiled like I was overthinking. But the smile was thin, brittle at the edges. I'd seen that look before, on people trying to cover their tracks. The attorney cleared his throat, not loudly, just enough to reclaim the moment. "If we're ready," he said. "Mr. Colburn, your grandfather's request was explicit. The contents are to be opened and read aloud, with all immediate family present." And just like that, my father stepped in. "Jacob," he said, turning to me like he'd just remembered I was there. "You know your grandfather wasn't himself those last few months." My mother joined in, voice soft and full of something that used to sound like care but now felt rehearsed. "He was emotional. He worried about you more than he let on. That wallet, he meant it as comfort, not insult." Then my brother, tone polished, added, "He loved you, but he didn't always get the big picture. You were always distant, practical. Maybe he just wanted to give you something personal." There it was, the trifecta. Dad discredits the source. Mom rewrites the motive. Brother reframes the context. It was like watching a dance I'd seen 100 times. Only this time I was watching from the outside, not stuck in the middle of it. They weren't reacting to what was in the envelope. They were trying to make me question whether I should care about it at all. That's how they did it. Always had. They didn't shout. They rewrote the scene until you felt ridiculous for ever raising your hand in the first place. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just let them finish. And then I looked at the attorney. He didn't budge. "There's no ambiguity here," he said, calm and clean. "This is a sealed, signed document with clear instructions. I'm obligated to proceed." He laid the envelope back on the table in front of me. It was mine again, officially. But more than that, it was the first time anyone, had placed a boundary they couldn't erase with tone. And that changed everything. This isn't just family anymore, I thought. This is documented. The air in the room had changed. The walls felt closer. Shadows stretched longer as the afternoon gave up more of its light. What had once been a quiet family gathering now felt like a boardroom with no exits. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the moment settle. And that's when I felt it again, the wallet pressing against my side. Same cracked leather. Same faded edges. Same insult. Except it didn't sting this time. It grounded me, a reminder, not of where I stood in this family, but of how carefully they'd tried to keep me sitting there. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and pressed against it lightly. I didn't need to pull it out. I already understood what it was. That wallet wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and it was part of something they didn't want seen. The attorney looked at me, waiting. Everyone else watched him now, not me, because somehow he'd become the unpredictable element in a script they thought they controlled. Then he said it. "Before we begin, I need to confirm, there is a second document." The room froze. My father, stoic, composed, always in control, turned to look at me. And for the first time that afternoon, he didn't hide his face. He couldn't, because it had already given him away. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. My father didn't speak right away. He adjusted his jacket, tugged once at the sleeves, then folded his hands on the table like a man ready for negotiations. His eyes didn't come to me. They stayed locked on the attorney, cold and precise. The shift in the room was subtle, but real. Daylight had mostly faded now. One of the lamps by the window had been turned on at some point, casting a soft yellow hue over the table, but it did nothing to warm the air. If anything, the house felt smaller, like we were being pulled into a tunnel, no way back. The attorney opened a black folder. Neat, unrushed. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of us before speaking. "There's a supplemental document," he said evenly. "Signed and notarized. It was executed roughly 9 months before Mr. Colburn's passing." He didn't say, "your grandfather," just Mr. Colburn. There was something important in that choice. Maybe it was the attorney's way of staying neutral, maybe it was just protocol. But to me, it made the whole thing more serious. "This document specifically references Jacob," he continued, his hand resting on the sealed envelope still on the table. My mother let out a tiny gasp. She covered it fast, with a small cough and a glance at her lap. My brother leaned back in his chair and gave a short, breathy laugh. That must have been when he started losing track of things. My father's voice followed just a beat too quickly. "This may not be what it seems," he said. "Let's not assume intentions that weren't there." But he didn't sound uncertain. He sounded prepared. It was the speed that gave them away. The way they moved together, falling into old roles without a pause. My mother's worried softness. My father's practiced diplomacy. My brother's arrogance dressed up as amusement. They weren't reacting, they were containing, like they had a script, and it wasn't the first time they'd used it. This isn't panic, I thought. It's a protocol. The realization didn't come with anger, not right away. What I felt first was betrayal, deep and dull, like a bruise under the skin you don't notice until someone presses on it. All those years I thought maybe they just didn't understand me, or didn't know how to show love. Maybe they were too reserved, too private. But now I could see it. They had always known what they were doing. The silence wasn't a gap, it was a method. The attorney hadn't moved. "I'm obligated to read it," he said calmly. "Unless formally contested, the terms outlined here stand as legal testimony." That was when I spoke. Just one sentence. "I want to hear it." I said it clearly, without raising my voice. I didn't look at anyone else when I said it. Not my father, not my brother. Just the attorney. Like he was the only one in the room who hadn't already picked a side. The room froze. My father's hand tightened around the armrest. My mother's lips parted like she wanted to say something, but didn't. My brother just blinked, slowly, then looked away. They hadn't expected me to speak. They hadn't expected me to want anything at all. It was my brother who broke the silence. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be," he said, still avoiding eye contact. My father added, almost gently, "Sometimes it's better to let certain things rest. For everyone's sake. For everyone's sake." I knew what that meant. It didn't mean peace. It didn't mean closure. It meant silence. Silence had always been their answer. To disappointment. To discomfort. To shame. The family rule wasn't don't do wrong. It was don't talk about it. Sweep it, cover it, move on. But this wasn't something I was willing to bury. Because the truth wasn't just buried. It was kept. And that was when the attorney said the words no one in my family wanted spoken out loud. Under state law. The moment law entered the room, everything changed. The attorney's voice was steady, unemotional. Under state law, any material changes to an estate, particularly those involving redistributions, require clear procedural record. Any effort to obscure, delay, or suppress those changes could be subject to legal review. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But it cleared the air like lightning cracked silence. My father didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair with the practiced stillness of a man who'd sat on more boards and committees than I could count. "We're all family here," he said, smoothing his tie like it mattered. "Surely we don't need to escalate." My mother shifted in her seat and placed her hand lightly on his. Her smile was soft, eyes distant. "Your grandfather always hated drama. He wanted peace at the end. No one looked at me when they said these things. They didn't have to. My brother had gone quiet. His earlier smirk was gone, his jaw tight. One heel bounced under the table, rapid, rhythmic. He wasn't performing anymore. He was watching the attorney closely. Something had cracked, and not just in them. In me too, because for years I told myself I was imagining it. The distance, the dismissals, the empty seats at holidays, or the way decisions got made without my name ever being brought up. I thought maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I'd misread it all. But now, this wasn't neglect. This was orchestration. Your grandfather would want us to stay a family, my mother said, almost like a prayer. And then my father, cooler now. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That did it. I felt it coil in my gut. The way they all moved in sync, like dancers who had rehearsed every step. Mother's calm, father's reason, brother's silence. They didn't need to argue. They just surrounded. It wasn't about yelling me down. It was about making me question if I had the right to speak at all. I looked at the table, at the attorney's briefcase, the edge of the open folder, and that envelope still sitting untouched. Everything in the room now pointed to that one spot. Everything radiated from there. My mother stood suddenly. Would anyone like tea? She asked, as if this were a book club. No one answered. And then she turned toward me. Jacob. The name felt foreign coming from her lips, like she was practicing saying it in public. She didn't wait for my answer before walking toward the kitchen, but her eyes lingered a second too long. I knew what that was. That wasn't a gesture of hospitality. That was a boundary, subtle, polite. A reminder that I didn't quite belong here. It wasn't new either. I'd heard it before in different forms. The seat saved for someone else. The story told as if I hadn't lived it. The inside jokes I wasn't inside of. This was just another variation. Would you like tea, stranger? I looked down. My hand had drifted toward my chest without thinking. The wallet was still there. Still cracked, still light, still silent. But something had shifted in it now. Earlier it had steadied me. A strange kind of anchor in the absurdity. But right now it was weight. It was the years of silence stitched into leather. It was every swallowed comeback, every turned cheek, every time I'd convinced myself to just let it go. My throat tightened. Maybe I don't belong here. The thought came fast, sharp. Maybe I never did. I glanced at the door. For a second I thought about leaving. Walking out would be clean, quiet, dignified even. Let them deal with their secrets. Let them go back to their choreography. But something held me in that chair. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was pain. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in a very long time, someone else in the room, the attorney, wasn't playing along. Then came my father's voice, smooth and low. Don't do this, son. Could have been advice. Could have been concern. But it wasn't. It was a line. And then my brother leaned over. Not loud, not smiling, not mocking. Just low enough that no one else could hear. Walk away, he said without looking at me. You're out of your depth. He meant it as a warning. But that was the moment I knew something they hadn't expected me to know. They weren't worried about me raising my voice. They were worried I'd stay seated. They were afraid of the silence that didn't leave. And I almost let it go. I almost told the attorney to stop, until she asked me for one thing I never expected, the wallet. I laughed under my breath because of all the things in that room, that wallet felt like the least important. It had been sitting in my pocket like dead weight, a reminder of a moment I would have paid good money to forget. The idea that anyone would ask for it, especially the attorney, struck me as ridiculous. But it wasn't the request that caught me off guard. It was the way everyone reacted to it. Before I even reached into my jacket, my mother froze mid-sip of tea. The cup trembled slightly, the spoon inside giving a soft clink. She didn't put it down. She just stared straight ahead, as if any motion might betray her. My father shifted, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. He turned his head toward the curtain window like something out there needed his attention. But it was reflex. A man avoiding a mirror he couldn't unsee. My brother didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just leaned forward a hair too much, eyes locked on the wallet like he'd known this moment was coming and didn't trust it to play out right. That's when I realized this wasn't about the wallet itself. It was about what they were afraid might be inside. I held it in my hand, fingers grazing the worn leather. Every mark on it now looked intentional. The loose stitching near the corner, the faded fold line on the inside. I almost turned to the attorney and said, "It's nothing." I nearly handed it over with a shrug and a tired smile, just to get the damn thing off me. But something stopped me. Not courage exactly, just exhaustion. I was tired of second-guessing myself, of looking around and wondering if I was crazy for noticing what I noticed, for feeling what I felt. If this whole situation had taught me anything, it was that pretending I didn't matter had made it easier for everyone else to act like I didn't. Still, even then, a part of me wanted out. I could have ended it, dropped the wallet on the table, made some joke, walked out with a story about how messy family gets when money's involved. I'd have slept better that night. Instead, I handed it over, slowly. The attorney took it with the care of someone handling something breakable. She didn't open it right away. She examined it first, fingers running across the stitching, tracing the bend. Then she paused. "There's something here," she murmured, more to herself than to us. A seam along the inner lining didn't match the rest. It was tighter, cleaner, newer. She pinched the edge, gently tugged, then stopped. She looked at me. "Do I have your permission?" I nodded. Her nails were steady as she pulled back the flap. It gave with the quietest sound, almost like a breath being held too long. And then, from that slim opening, she drew out a piece of folded paper, creased, old, but intact. The room didn't move, not at first. Then it broke. My mother gasped, sharp and real, the kind of sound you can't fake or pull back once it's out. Her cup hit the saucer with a light clatter. My father stepped forward without realizing it, 1 foot toward the attorney. But then he caught himself and placed both hands behind his back, as if restraint made him look noble. And my brother snapped. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, too fast, too loud. That was his tell. He didn't ask what it was, didn't try to act confused. He jumped straight to dismissal. And just like that, I knew. They'd known, or at least suspected. They didn't think I'd notice. They thought I'd throw it away, like everything else they ever gave me, like the hand-me-downs, the unspoken apologies, the invitations that always came with disclaimers. This wallet, the joke gift from a man I was told barely remembered me, had carried something they didn't want found. I felt lightheaded. The attorney didn't unfold the note. She held it with 2 fingers, careful not to smudge whatever was written inside. "This," she said quietly, "was part of your grandfather's instruction. It was hidden, which suggests intent, possibly tampering." My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother was whispering something, not words, just a low, steady hum, like she was trying to calm herself from the inside out. And I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sure. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering if I was making too much of things. I wasn't doubting my instincts. I wasn't begging for context or trying to reframe my childhood to make sense of the silences. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice, a structure, a system that kept me just close enough to see the table, but never to sit at it. The attorney placed the note on top of the envelope. She didn't look at me this time. She looked at my father. "Before I read this," she said, voice firm but not unkind, "there's something you need to explain." My father didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than words ever had. He didn't fumble or stammer. He just sat there, hands folded too neatly on the table, as if he were trying to will the moment into something ordinary. His gaze fixed not on the note, nor the attorney, nor me. He stared at the grain of the wood beneath his fingers, like a man who knew the walls were finally talking back. Outside, I could hear the faint tapping of rain against the window. It wasn't dramatic, just steady, like a metronome counting down to something that couldn't be stopped. The silence stretched. I watched him adjust his glasses. A small movement, but intentional, just enough to look composed. just enough to buy time. But I knew that trick. I'd seen it 100 times growing up. It was what he did when he wasn't ready to lie yet, but needed to figure out which lie would hurt least. The attorney said nothing more. She didn't pressure him. She simply waited, still holding the folded note between her fingers like it weighed more than the truth itself. Then came the first crack. "I've reviewed the filings," she said calmly, "and there are inconsistencies, dates that don't line up, documents marked as submitted but not filed, mentions of meetings that never happened." She wasn't accusing. She was documenting. My mother didn't defend him. She sat back, arms folded over her chest, her face drawn tight, like she'd practiced this moment over and over, and now that it was here, her body had gone numb. Her usual rehearsed lines, the emotional bridges she liked to throw into any conversation, were suddenly gone. My brother stood up. Restless energy radiated off him like heat. He began pacing in short, controlled steps, his fingers tapping against his thigh. I could see it happening in real time. The hierarchy in the room was breaking apart. Whatever plan they had, it was unraveling. I looked down at the note again. I hadn't even read it yet. No one had. And still, it had the power to dismantle something that had stood for decades. Maybe that was the point. I leaned forward, keeping my voice level. "I just want to be clear," I said. "You all had access to the documents. You knew about the amendment. And instead of talking to me about any of it, you buried it. You treated my silence like permission. No one interrupted. That wasn't a mistake," I added. "That was a decision." There was no outrage in my tone. No demand for apologies. I didn't even expect a reaction. But I saw the way my father blinked twice in rapid succession, the only tell he had left. I wasn't the kid anymore. I wasn't asking for understanding. I was standing in my own damn place. Then my brother cracked. He spun around and pointed toward the wallet on the table. "You don't deserve to manage anything," he said, voice thin with strain. "You were never meant to be part of this." There it was. Not protection. Not concern. Control. That had always been the foundation. Not legacy, not loyalty, just making sure I stayed in the place they assigned me. He caught himself too late, but the damage was done. And oddly, I didn't feel angry. I felt a done. Done pretending. Done hoping. Done asking for something they'd never planned to give. I turned my gaze toward the attorney, and for a split second, I saw the faintest nod from her. Not approval, not encouragement. Just recognition. She'd seen this before. Maybe not in this room with this family, but somewhere. In another house where silence had been weaponized. Where truth had been rationed out like scraps. I looked back at my family, and something shifted inside me. I no longer needed them to change. I no longer needed them to see me. I just needed to see the finish line. Because truth, I realized, doesn't fix people. It frees you from needing them to. That's when my brother pulled out his phone and said, "Fine. Let's show everyone who you really are." That's when my brother pulled out his phone and said, "Fine. Let's show everyone who you really are." He didn't wait for permission. He didn't even look at me. His thumb tapped the screen with the confidence of someone who believed the ending was already written. The video started playing before I could stop him. It was my voice. That much was unmistakable. Same cadence. Same pauses. The same tired edge I get when I've worked too many hours in a row. But the words were wrong. Sliced down, rearranged, stripped of everything around them. Sentences that once belonged to long conversations now stood alone, sharp and ugly. I sounded obsessed with money, defensive, small. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Not because she was shocked, because the story fit too neatly. My father didn't move at all. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if he were watching a storm he'd helped forecast. The room shifted in a way I recognized instantly. Not outrage, judgment. For a moment, every instinct I'd ever learned kicked in at once. Explain. Correct the record. Say the rest of the sentence. Tell them when and why those words were spoken. I felt the familiar pull toward apology, toward smoothing things over, toward carrying the emotional burden just to keep the peace. I did none of it. I stayed still. I let the silence stretch. Because I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn. If you defend yourself against a lie built for performance, you become part of the show. The video ended. My brother lowered the phone, already breathing easier, already convinced the damage was done. No one asked a question. That was the hardest part. The way doubt filled the room without a single word. The way silence, once again, tried to press me back into my old shape. I looked down at my hands and noticed they weren't shaking. That surprised me. I realized then that this was the fork in the road. If I reacted emotionally, I would confirm the picture he'd painted. If I stayed quiet forever, the lie would harden into truth. So I chose something else. Verification. The attorney spoke before I did. Her tone didn't change. No accusation, no disbelief, just process. "When was this recorded?" she asked. My brother hesitated. "Just long enough." "And where is the full file?" she continued. "Not a clip. The original." He scoffed, but it came out thin. "This is the file." She nodded once as if expecting that answer. "Then you won't mind providing the metadata. The timestamps appear inconsistent with the date you referenced earlier." The room tightened again, but this time around him. She went on, calmly pointing out small details I would have never noticed. A jump in audio, a missing header, compression artifacts that suggested editing. Nothing dramatic, just facts stacking up one by one. My brother's confidence didn't shatter. Cracked. Barely. But it was enough. I finally spoke. "If you had the truth," I said evenly, "you wouldn't need to cut it." No one interrupted. No one argued. The words landed and stayed there, heavy and undeniable. The attorney closed her folder and reached into her briefcase. "There is one final document," she said. "Sealed. Addressed solely to you." She held it out to me. As I took it, I felt the weight. Not of paper, but of everything it represented. The room reacted immediately. Not with anger, with fear. My father leaned forward just slightly. My mother's eyes fixed on the envelope, unblinking. My brother went very still. They knew. Whatever was inside, they already knew. The envelope was already in my hands when my father finally said my name like it mattered. And that was when my father finally said my name, like it mattered. His voice didn't carry authority this time. It sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Not broken, just unsure. Like someone who finally realized the room didn't move when he spoke anymore. I didn't rush. I'd waited my whole life for this moment. My hands moved slowly, not from fear, but from intention. I broke the wax seal with the edge of my thumb. The paper inside was thick, textured like something that had waited in the dark for years to be touched. I unfolded it once, then again. It was a short letter. The attorney leaned in just enough to verify the handwriting and signature. "It's his," she confirmed quietly. "Written 4 months before he passed. Notarized. The seal matches." The room leaned forward, not with hope, with dread. They weren't afraid of what they didn't know. They were afraid of what they already suspected. I read silently first. The ink was dark and deliberate. No rambles, no regrets. Just lines etched like they were meant to outlast all the noise that came after. My grandfather had left me more than oversight. He'd left clarity. "You stayed when others stood at a distance," he wrote. "You listened when others talked over me. If they ever try to break you again, walk away." I didn't say a word. The attorney gently reached for the document. "May I?" I handed it to her. She read parts of it aloud carefully so each word had its own weight. The room shrank with every sentence. It outlined that I was to oversee the estate transition, not as a reward, but as a recognition of integrity. It included clear directives that any obstruction, concealment, or unauthorized action would be considered a breach of legal and ethical responsibility. My father's chair scraped slightly as he shifted. He wasn't crying. That would have made him human. Instead, his fists curled tight against his knees, jaw clenched as if trying to hold in every loss of control. His face flushed, not with sadness, but with something darker. He stood abruptly. "That's not," He didn't even tell me he wrote that. The attorney met his eyes. That's because he documented it, not negotiated it. You think this means something? He snapped. That letter has legal weight, she interrupted, calm but firm. Combined with what we've already reviewed, it raises serious concerns. My brother tried to jump in. He probably tricked him into writing it. He was old. He didn't know what he was saying, but his voice lacked force now. Came out thinner, like he already knew he was speaking too late. My mother whispered, "Can we please not tear this family apart over paperwork?" No one responded. The attorney continued almost methodically. There are clear signs of document manipulation on 3 prior filings. We will need to submit those for review. Additionally, the video used earlier may qualify as false evidence if it's presented in any official proceeding. My brother took a step back, one hand on the side of his neck like he was trying to stop something from rising. My father didn't retreat. He raised his voice instead. "I am still the head of this family. You think some words on paper change that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because this time, the structure spoke louder than any of us. I reached into my pocket again. Slowly, deliberately, the old wallet came out, its edges frayed, the leather soft from years of being ignored. I opened it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There, in the back crease, folded tight and small, was the last note. The one I hadn't shown anyone. The one I wasn't even sure I believed existed until that moment. It read, "If they ever try to make you smaller than you are, don't ask for their permission to be whole." I closed the wallet gently. For the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. Felt like a release. I stood, not to fight, not to yell, just to leave. "I won't sign anything tonight," I said, voice steady. "And I won't stay where I'm not seen." My father said my name again, louder, urgent, but I didn't turn. Outside, the rain had slowed, still falling but softer now. The kind of rain that doesn't punish, it just insists you keep walking. I stepped onto the porch, and for the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe. The sky was still dark, but the edge of dawn was starting to show in the east. The air smelled like wet cedar and the dust that never quite leaves Texas soil. I sat on the front steps, the wallet beside me. Not clutched, just there, like a marker of everything survived. There wasn't a next chapter with them, only the one I finally wrote for myself.